Have you ever stopped to think what the world would be like today if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten the forbidden fruit? This simple gesture, narrated in the book of Genesis, was the starting point for what many call original sin. This moment was so crucial, so decisive, that the entire history of humanity, from the beginnings to the present day, was shaped by it. But what if it were different? What if Adam and Eve had resisted temptation and obeyed God? What would the world be like today if original sin had never occurred? Have you ever imagined the magnitude of this impact? When we think about this moment, we are forced to question everything we know. The idea that sin entered the world through human choice profoundly alters our view of what is right and wrong. What would happen in a world where humanity had not been separated from God? What would our lives, our choices, our purpose be like? Would we be different? Would we be living in a world without pain, without suffering, without the moral complexities we face every day? Would the absence of original sin have transformed the way we live our spiritual, social, and even emotional lives? The question of what if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten the fruit goes far beyond a simple exercise of imagination. It touches on the heart of what it means to be human. Would we be purer, more just, more capable of living in harmony with each other? Or could it be that in a world without original sin, humanity would not have developed the virtues that we value so much, such as compassion, mercy, and the ability to forgive? Would human beings be more virtuous without the challenges that sin brought? Or would the absence of difficulties make our morals stagnant without the growth that adversities provide us? If we look at human history, we see that societies and cultures were formed based on values shaped by this separation between God and man. Without original sin, would the history of Christianity and even morality itself have unfolded differently? How would the spiritual, intellectual, and social evolution of humanity have been affected? Would the great struggles that defined the history of civilization, such as the struggle for freedom, for human rights, for equality, be the same? Were the great social and political transformations driven by the same forces, or would the absence of sin have changed the trajectory of humanity irreversibly? In a world without the influence of original sin, what would have happened to the concept of freedom? Would we be freer in our moral, spiritual, and existential choices, or would the lack of challenges and free will be an obstacle to true moral and spiritual growth? Free will, with all its dilemmas, was given to Adam and Eve the moment they chose to disobey God. In a world where this choice had never been made, how would it have altered our ability to make genuine choices? Furthermore, the very nature of suffering and death would be different. What would humanity be like if suffering had never arisen, if death was not a reality to be faced? Suffering, although painful, is also one of life's greatest teachers. Without him, would humanity have learned the lessons that we today consider essential to our spiritual and moral evolution? Or are we just living in a state of purity, but without the depth of understanding that suffering gives us? The presence of suffering in our existence teaches us about resilience, about forgiveness, about love for others. Without this presence, would our spiritual journey have the same meaning? And most intriguing of all, what would be humanity's relationship with God in a world without original sin? In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve lived in perfect communion with the Creator, without any separation or barrier. The possibility of living in full harmony with God, without the intervention of sin, brings to light the doubt. Would we be closer to God without sin? Or would the lack of original sin be a condition that would prevent humanity from experiencing true love, true connection with the Creator? The question, what if Adam and Eve had made a different choice? It's not just a historical curiosity. It leads us to think about how today's decisions in our own lives can create a better or worse future for us and future generations. The decision-making power that we all have at all times is immense, and this reflection encourages us to take responsibility for our choices. By liking this video, you not only validate this reflection, but also help to spread this message to more people. The impact of this discussion is transformative and can truly change the way we view our own lives and choices. Click like now and be part of this mission to spread powerful ideas about human choices and their consequences. How has your view of original sin and its implications for the world changed with this video? Your experience and opinion are valuable to us all and can inspire other people to reflect on what they could change in their own lives from this reflection. Share in the comments what this message brought you and how it can change other people's way of living. You are already part of this community that seeks deep knowledge and transforms lives with powerful reflections. By subscribing, you are part of a growing movement of people committed to understanding the impact of our choices on history and humanity. Let's continue exploring these life-changing topics together. Sign up now to further strengthen this mission. Imagine for a moment what would have happened if Adam and Eve had resisted temptation and never eaten the forbidden fruit. It seems impossible, doesn't it? After all, this moment in biblical history is deeply rooted in our understanding of humanity, sin, and even the nature of good and evil. Original sin from this simple act of disobedience shaped the entire human experience, bringing with it pain, suffering, separation from God, and an irreversible change in our relationship with the Creator. But what if this error had never occurred? What would become of us, our relationships with God, our societies, and our understanding of good and evil? If Adam and Eve had never eaten the forbidden fruit, the impact would be unimaginable. Maybe you are wondering, what would the world be like if they hadn't given in to temptation? How would humanity have developed without the separation that original sin brought? Would we be purer, more connected with God, more capable of living harmoniously and justly? What if, without original sin, there was no need for redemption and Jesus' sacrifice on the cross? Would we be living in a world free from pain and suffering? Or would the absence of sin have made us stagnant human beings, without the need to choose between good and evil? These are questions that make us reflect on the true nature of humanity. When we look at today's world, with all its challenges, uncertainties, and pain, it is difficult to imagine what our life would be like without the weight of sin. But at the same time, this reflection leads us to question whether the very existence of our morality, our virtues, and even our understanding of freedom would be possible without the fall. Original sin brought with it the need for redemption, and with it, the opportunity for growth, learning, and even transformation. In a world where original purity was maintained, would humanity have evolved in such a rich and profound way, with so many dilemmas and decisions that shape us every day? When trying to imagine a world without original sin, we are faced with the paradox of a perfect world, but without the growth that comes from challenges and the fight against evil. Humanity, without original sin, might have remained in a state of purity and harmony with God, but it would also have lost the ability to learn from mistakes, to grow through suffering, and to understand the value of redemption. As human beings, our capacity for empathy, forgiveness, and love arose from our experience with pain, with the internal struggle between good and evil. Without this journey of self-discovery and overcoming, how would humanity have developed? Would the initial purity of Adam and Eve have been enough to take humanity to a higher level of spiritual and moral understanding? Now, when considering these questions, it is impossible not to think about the implications this choice has had throughout history. Original sin is not just a narrative removed from the Bible. It continues to reverberate to this day. He teaches us about human nature, about our ability to make choices, about what is necessary to achieve redemption. Without original sin, there would have been no need for sacrifices, for the search for salvation, for a deep understanding of the nature of love and forgiveness. Perhaps humanity would never have achieved the capacity for spiritual transformation that we have today, a transformation that is often only possible by overcoming the mistakes made. Now, after reflecting on what a world without original sin would mean for humanity, I ask myself, what do you think? What would life be like for you, your family, your social relationships, in a world where Adam and Eve had not made the choice to disobey God? What do you imagine would have changed? This is a profound and, in some ways, even uncomfortable reflection. Would the lack of sin have given us a simpler, purer life, or would it have deprived us of one of the most valuable experiences? The ability to learn from our mistakes and achieve transformation. I want to know what you think about this. How do you believe humanity would have developed without original sin? Leave your comment below and share your perspective. His insight on this topic can open up new ways of understanding ourselves and the world in which we live. When Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, something far beyond a simple act of disobedience happened. From that moment on, humanity suffered a profound rupture with God, a rupture that brought eternal consequences. The separation that followed marked the beginning of a new era for humanity, and sin, which until then did not exist, entered the world, completely transforming human nature and the relationship that man had with his Creator. This event, original sin, was not just an isolated error by Adam and Eve, but a turning point in human history. It was the introduction of evil into the world, something that, for thousands of years, would shape the lives of all human beings. Before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve lived in a state of purity, in perfect communion with God. The Garden of Eden was a place of harmony, without pain, without death, without suffering. They were immersed in complete happiness, and their relationship with God was direct, without barriers. But by giving in to temptation, by disobeying the only commandment given by God, a drastic change occurred. Disobedience brought the fall, and sin became the new reality of humanity. When we reflect on this, we are faced with a fundamental question. What would have become of us if Adam and Eve had resisted temptation? What would have happened if sin had never entered the world? Would we be different? Would the world be different? The answer to these questions is complex and involves both spiritual and existential questions. Original sin not only affected Adam and Eve's relationship with God, but it had a profound impact on the structure of the very world in which we live. Suffering, pain, death, all these elements that are part of the human experience, arose as a consequence of sin. Without the fall, humanity would not have experienced pain, mourning, or the moral struggle between good and evil. This concept of original sin, although central to Christian theology, is also a metaphor for the human condition we all face today. We are all born with this mark of sin, with the tendency to make mistakes and move away from God. This is not a momentary failure, but something that affects our nature and our actions throughout our lives. Sin is not just the act of disobeying a commandment, but something deeper that corrupts the essence of the human being, creating a separation between him and the Creator. The separation that Adam and Eve experienced when eating the forbidden fruit was immediate, but its consequences reverberate for generations. Since that moment, humanity has lived in a world marked by division, pain, and the internal struggle between good and evil. And the true tragedy of original sin is not just disobedience, but the loss of perfect communion with God. Sin has created a barrier that separates us from the Creator, and this separation manifests itself in many ways, whether in our daily suffering, in the difficulties we face, or in our inability to live fully according to God's will. This idea of separation from God and the creation of a new reality for humans may be difficult to fully understand, but the experience of living in a fallen world reminds us of this every day. When we look at the difficulties of life, at wars, pain, and suffering, we see how the separation between God and humanity is reflected in our experiences. If Adam and Eve had obeyed, evil would not have entered the world, and consequently human history would be unrecognizable. This reflection leads us to question, what would our life be like today without original sin? The absence of sin would have created a perfect world, but also without the challenges that today help us grow morally and spiritually. If there were no need for redemption, for transformation, would we have the same understanding of the importance of virtue, forgiveness, and love? Sin, although it brought pain and suffering, also brought to light the virtues we value, such as compassion, patience, and the strength to overcome adversity. Imagine a world without this constant struggle between good and evil. Would we be more human or more instinctual, without the experience of choosing between right and wrong? Would the virtues we cultivate throughout life be as significant without the contrast that sin brings? And as we look at the choices we make every day, with the weight of separation from God, have we not become more aware of our need for His grace and forgiveness? Original sin, despite bringing great consequences, also gives us the chance to seek something greater, something deeper, reconciliation with God, and the opportunity for redemption. These questions may seem challenging, but they help us understand that the story of Adam and Eve is not just a story of the past, it is a reflection of our own human condition. We all bear the mark of original sin, and this internal struggle between good and evil is something we all deal with. Now I want to know, how does this reflection on original sin impact your outlook on life and the choices you make? Leave your comment below and share what you think about the consequences of this fall for humanity and what it means for our spiritual journey. Before disobedience, Adam and Eve lived in a state of absolute purity, immersed in a perfect relationship with God. The Garden of Eden was not only the setting for an existence without pain or suffering, but a sacred space where humanity experienced direct and intimate communion with the Creator. They walked side by side with God, with no barrier between them, in a harmony so pure that it is difficult to conceive in today's world. Now imagine a world where this perfect connection with God had never been broken. What would it be like? In our reality, the separation that sin brought introduced a distance between man and the Creator, a distance that makes us unable to experience the same direct communion that Adam and Eve enjoyed in Eden. Without sin, would we be able to continue this close relationship? Would we have lived in a state of constant harmony with God, without the need for intermediaries, without the search for redemption or forgiveness? What would humanity be like if, instead of moving away, it had deepened this relationship with the Creator? This reflection leads us to a deep question about what we lost with original sin. If Adam and Eve had obeyed God, what would that have meant for our spiritual journey? Perhaps without sin, humanity would have achieved a more direct and deeper spiritual evolution, free from the separation that sin caused. The search for a just life, full of virtue and morality, could be simpler, more immediate, since there would not be the barrier of sin to be overcome. Would the relationship with God, without the interference of evil, have developed in a more pure and direct way? What's fascinating is that this perfect connection with God was not just spiritual but also emotional and physical. Adam and Eve were not separated from God by any abstract concept of faith, as we often are, but rather in a direct and real experience of divine presence. This not only linked them to God, but also to the rest of creation. They were part of an ecosystem of harmony and perfection, where everything around them, from animals to plants, was in total balance with humanity and the Creator. This scenario is difficult to imagine in a world where the challenges of sin surround us, but the vision of Eden leads us to reflect on what it really means to live in harmony with God and creation. Without original sin, this experience of oneness with God would have been our reality. Instead of living seeking a spiritual connection, trying to draw closer to God through prayer and faith, we would have been able to live in communion with Him immediately, experiencing His presence in a tangible way at every moment. Every step, every breath, every act of our lives would have been in harmony with God's will, without the internal conflicts that arise from our struggle with sin. Now, when thinking about this possibility, a natural question arises: would we be more complete, more fulfilled, more aware of our divine nature and our purpose? How would humanity have developed spiritually in a world without the temptation of sin? Would the fight against evil have been unnecessary? Or would we be living in a state of constant spiritual elevation, closer to our true selves? Sin, by separating us from God, makes us seek the meaning of life in a distant place. But what if humanity had never known this separation? What would our faith journey have been like? What also draws attention is the free will, which without sin would have manifested itself in a purer way. The free will given to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was not marked by the temptation of evil, but by the freedom to choose in full harmony with God. If humanity had never experienced temptation and fall, would it be easier to make choices that were in full accordance with the divine will? Or would freedom of choice be something empty, since there would be no contrast between good and evil? The direct relationship with God that Adam and Eve experienced without the intervention of sin would have provided a type of spiritual evolution that we now imagine is impossible. Without the experience of evil, could humanity have achieved superior moral and spiritual perfection? Or would the spiritual journey have been different, perhaps with a greater focus on growth, learning, and experiencing God? Now think about this for a moment. If this direct connection with God were possible, what would we have done with it? Would we be better able to live a life of purity, of love, of inner peace, or perhaps without sin, without the constant struggle between right and wrong, our ability to make moral decisions would have been impaired? Ultimately, this reflection challenges us to think about our own spiritual journey today and how sin and separation from God shape the way we seek connection with Him. I want to hear from you. What do you believe our relationship with God would be? Like if the fall of Adam and Eve had never occurred? How do you see the possibility of a life without the separation caused by original sin? Leave your opinion in the comments and share how this reflection affects your view of spirituality and the connection with the Creator. Your insight is essential to broadening this debate and helping us all think more deeply about our journey with God. Now, imagine a world without sin, a place where pain, suffering, illness, and death do not exist. Everything around us is in perfect harmony, where human beings live in peace, in prosperity, and in full communion with God. Could this be paradise? Could this be the utopia we are all looking for? Or perhaps a life without original sin and without the challenges of the fall would make our existence more empty and without purpose? Let's reflect on this. Original sin, as we know, not only brought suffering, but also the opportunity for growth. Without it, we would not have the need to learn, to evolve spiritually, to develop our morality and ethics. The absence of difficulties would make life easier, but also it would deprive us of the chance to make meaningful choices, choices that shape us, that make us better or worse with each decision. The experience of evil, the fight against error, helps us understand what is good, what is fair, what is right. But imagine for a moment a perfect world without any kind of pain or suffering. Would we be happier, or would we just be stagnant human beings living without purpose, without moral challenges, without the need to discern between right and wrong? How would humanity have developed? Would our virtues and values be as appreciated and necessary without the contrast of sin, without the internal struggle that we all face in our lives? When we think of perfection, we often associate it with a state of peace and harmony. But what does it really mean to live in harmony? Without original sin, there would be no suffering, of course, but there would also be no growth, learning, or improvement. We wouldn't need to learn to forgive because forgiveness only exists because evil exists. We wouldn't have to learn to be patient, to be compassionate, to help each other in times of trouble, because in a sinless world everyone would be naturally good. But would the virtues we value today be as profound without the presence of sin and the need to choose between good and evil? Are these virtues just a reflection of human nature, or something that would actually be cultivated through free will, the choices we make every day? Now think about the free will, which is the basis for all our moral choices. If there were no original sin, humanity would not have experienced the temptation to disobey God. This would mean that our moral choices would be empty, since there would be no challenge, no decision to be made. Free will in a perfect, sinless world would become irrelevant. We would not need to choose between right and wrong, between good and evil, because we would be in a natural state of harmony with the Creator. But would this make our freedom of choice a true freedom? Or would it be a freedom without value, without meaning, without the possibility of making mistakes and learning from one's own mistakes? Sinless perfection, without the need to make significant moral choices, may seem attractive at first glance, but could this really be the kind of existence that would lead us to our full potential? Would we be able to develop virtues such as courage, generosity, compassion, and justice if there was nothing that challenged us to act in a fair and altruistic way? Suffering, although painful, teaches us to be stronger. It teaches us to value what is good, what is fair, what is virtuous. Without this opposition, perhaps our virtues would not have the same depth. So what does perfection mean to us? In a world where sin had never entered, would it be possible for humanity to have a deep understanding of love, kindness, and truth? Perfection would not just be an absence of flaws or problems, but a deep understanding of what it means to be truly good, truly just, and truly loving. And this would only be possible paradoxically through choice, the fight against evil, the experience of suffering that in some way teaches us to be better and stronger. This is the complexity of perfection that we have to understand. True perfection is not only the absence of pain, but it is also the continuous development of the virtues that today we consider fundamental to our humanity. Sin, pain, suffering, and even error are necessary for us to understand and appreciate what is good, what is right, what is fair. Would a sinless world rob us of the moral and spiritual depth we now have? So, thinking about all this, I want to hear from you. How do you view the idea of sinless perfection? Do you think humanity would be purer and more virtuous without original sin? Or do you believe our moral and spiritual evolution would be more limited without the experience of evil and the need to make moral choices? Leave your opinion in the comments. This is a profound debate that leads us to question the very nature of humanity, good and evil, and what it means to live fully and truly. Now imagine for a moment that Adam and Eve had resisted temptation, and consequently, sin had never entered the world. What would have happened to humanity? Without the separation caused by sin, would the spiritual evolution of humanity have been more direct and deeper? Thinking about this scenario, leads us to question what our relationship with God would have been like, our understanding of the divine, and our search for spirituality. Today we are confronted with the idea that the separation caused by sin is what drives us to seek redemption. The need for salvation through Jesus Christ and the desire to be reconciled with God arose from this fall. But what if the sin had never occurred? How would humanity have developed spiritually without the shadow of this separation? Would our connection with God be more immediate, purer, without the burden of sin to keep us from Him? Instead of having to seek salvation, would we be able to live in full harmony with the Creator from the beginning, without the barrier of evil, temptation, and suffering? It is interesting to think about possibility of a world where humanity had achieved a more direct and deeper spiritual evolution without original sin to interfere. If the sin had never occurred, would we have a more immediate understanding of the divine will? What does it mean to live according to God's true will? Without sin, would it be easier to live in complete obedience to His word, without the temptation that diverts us from the right path? Or would the absence of this constant struggle against temptation have weakened our ability to make spiritually meaningful choices? The fight against sin, in a way, teaches us about virtue and leads us to grow spiritually. When we look at our spiritual development today, we see how sin, despite being something that brings pain and suffering, was also a mechanism that it allowed us to deepen our understanding of God and our own humanity. Without original sin, the concept of grace, of forgiveness, of redemption, of transformation would not have become so central in our spiritual journey. The need to restore our relationship with God, to seek His help to overcome human failures, gave rise to some of the most profound practices of faith, such as prayer, confession, and meditation. But at the same time, without sin, would humanity have evolved towards a purer, simpler, more direct spirituality? Would the absence of separation between man and God have led to a closer, more constant and immersive relationship, without the need for intermediaries, without sin obscuring our vision of God? Could we have experienced a deeper connection with the Creator without the experience of evil? One of the most challenging questions that arises is that without sin there would be no need for a Savior, for a redemption that came to reconcile humanity with God. Would this have changed the very idea of salvation, the notion that we need to be saved from something, perhaps making our relationship with God simpler, more peaceful, but without the same depth of meaning that we acquire through the search for redemption? Without sin, we may never have experienced the depth of repentance and restoration, nor the joy of being transformed by divine grace. Furthermore, without original sin, would we be more spiritually mature and conscious beings? The separation between man and God brought with it a constant search to get closer to Him, a process that, although painful, also made us grow. Would the spiritual journey have been more direct, without the interference of sin, or would it have become more superficial, more self-centered, without the challenge of evil to teach us virtue? The absence of sin, of course, would have eliminated many of our greatest sufferings, but life without these spiritual challenges, without the need to choose between good and evil, would it be as enriching as the life we live now? We can imagine a world where humanity achieves full spirituality without the marks of sin, but we can also realize that perhaps the moral and spiritual evolution that humanity has experienced has been intensified precisely by this constant struggle. Sin challenges us, forces us to grow, to reflect, to learn. Now, with all this in mind, what do you think would have happened if humanity had evolved spiritually without the need for redemption? Would humanity's spiritual evolution have been simpler or more profound? Leave your opinion in the comments. What do you think about the relationship between original sin and the spiritual development of humanity? How would the absence of this event have impacted our spiritual journey and our relationship with God? Original sin has had a profound and lasting impact on human history. It was not just an isolated fall, but an event that resonated throughout civilization, creating waves of consequences that still shape the way we live today. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit, sin entered the world, and with it, pain, suffering, death, and injustice began to mark the human experience. Imagine a world where this had never happened, where evil had never entered the hearts of human beings. How would humanity have developed without internal struggles against sin, without the constant battle between good and evil? It is impossible to fully understand human history without considering original sin as it opened the door to corruption, selfishness, and all forms of injustice that we have seen throughout the centuries. If we think about the great tragedies of history, such as wars, oppression, inequalities, and abusive systems of power, we will see how sin and human failures played a central role. Without original sin, would it be possible that humanity had evolved in a more just and peaceful way? What would societies be like without the corruption that sin has brought, without the selfishness that drives them, without the tendency to want to dominate others? When we look at history, we see that many of humanity's greatest conflicts were caused by divisions that arose from sin. Envy, pride, greed, and the quest for power are deeply rooted in human nature, and original sin is the key to understanding how these feelings have taken over our social relationships. From the first wars, the oppression of the weakest, and the injustices committed in the name of power, to the inequalities we still face today, sin has created a scenario in which humanity constantly deals with evil, the struggle for rights and internal divisions. Now, if Adam and Eve had made the right choice, if they had obeyed God's command, humanity would have been free from these scars. Without the fall, perhaps humanity would not have known the pain of wars or the weight of social inequalities. But at the same time, it is important to reflect. Would a sinless world really have evolved in such a rich and complex way as the world we know today? The fight against injustice, as painful as it was, also generated some of the greatest social and political changes in history, such as the abolition of slavery, civil rights, and the fight for gender equality. It's fascinating to realize that humanity's greatest victories have often come from our resistance against evil. The fight for justice, equality, freedom, and human rights, it is deeply rooted in the constant battle between good and evil, which is, in some way, a consequence of original sin. If sin had never existed, perhaps humanity would never have challenged itself to reach a better state, to fight against injustice, and to seek redemption. On the other hand, sin also brought with it a shadow, a division between people, and a disconnection with divine purpose. Oppression, discrimination, racism, violence, all of these evils would not be possible without original sin, but they also leave us with a question. Would it be possible for humanity to have developed a more refined morality without the need to deal with the challenges posed by sin? In a sinless world, where separation from God did not exist, would the moral struggle we know, with all its virtues and difficulties, have formed in the same way? This impact of sin on human history is not something that can be easily resolved or ignored. It is rooted in the foundations of how we organize our societies, the values we uphold, and the struggles we fight every day. But at the same time, human history is also marked by our ability to fight against evil, to unite to overcome injustice, and to seek, even in the midst of darkness, the light of truth and justice. And here comes a deep reflection on our human condition. Would humanity have the same resilience, the same ability to fight for good and transform adversities into opportunities for growth if we had never known sin? Would we have developed our understanding of good, forgiveness, courage, and solidarity without the difficulties imposed by evil? Sin, although it has brought so much suffering, has also provided humanity with a chance to learn, to evolve morally and spiritually, and to transform pain into learning. Now, in light of all this, I want to hear from you. How do you think original sin shaped the history of humanity, the struggles and achievements we experience today? Would it be that without him, humanity would have developed as strong a sense of justice as we have now? Leave your opinion in the comments on how sin has impacted history and what humanity has learned from this constant struggle. His insight on this topic can help us all reflect more deeply on the true nature of good and evil and how our moral journey was shaped. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross is, without a doubt, the culmination of the history of salvation. We believe that this redemptive act was necessary because, through the original sin of Adam and Eve, humanity was separated from God, and sin entered the world, creating a gulf between man and the Creator. But what if original sin had never occurred? Would Jesus' sacrifice have been necessary? If Adam and Eve had resisted temptation and remained in perfect harmony with God, how would salvation history have unfolded? What's more, how would Christ's message itself have been shaped without the need for redemption? These questions are complex and provoke deep reflection on the origins of our faith and the purpose of Christ's coming to the world. Christianity, as the religion we know today, is inextricably linked to the idea of original sin and the need for salvation. Without original sin, would Christ's mission have the same meaning? What would happen if man had never been separated from God? To understand this issue, we need to consider the crucial role of original sin in constructing the need for redemption. Original sin brought a separation between man and God. The direct, full, and harmonious relationship that Adam and Eve experienced in the Garden of Eden was broken, creating an abyss impossible for man to cross. Without original sin, this separation would not have occurred. And if there were no need for reconciliation between man and God, would Jesus' sacrifice have really been necessary? How would humanity have understood Christ's mission without this barrier that original sin imposed? Original sin generated the perception that something was deeply wrong in the world and consequently in humanity. He gave rise to the need for redemption. Without the fall, what would Jesus' sacrifice represent for humanity? Would he have been seen simply as a great teacher, like other prophets who have emerged throughout history, or would his death on the cross have been understood as an essential act of salvation? Christianity is not just a religion of morality, where people seek to follow good examples and comply with a series of ethical precepts. It is centered on a radical truth. Man is far from God and needs to be reconciled with him. This reconciliation, according to Christian doctrine, would only be possible through Christ's sacrifice. The sacrifice of Jesus, the Son of God, is a unique and decisive act which allows human beings to achieve forgiveness for their sins and thus restore communion with the Creator. Without the introduction of sin into the world, this separation would never have occurred, and therefore the need for such profound redemption would not have arisen. So what would happen to Christ's mission in a world without original sin? If man had remained in perfect communion with God, would Jesus have been just a preacher of good news, like so many others throughout history? Would his life, death, and resurrection have the same depth, or would he be seen in a completely different way? Would he be considered the Savior, or just a great philosopher, without the need for his sacrifice? These questions lead us to an even deeper reflection on the nature of Jesus and the mission he fulfilled. Christianity is structured on the idea that Christ is the Redeemer, the one who came to save humanity from sin. Without original sin, the idea of redemption, salvation, forgiveness, and transformation would perhaps not be so relevant. The need for a Savior would arise as a reflection of the separation created by the fall of Adam and Eve. Without sin, there would be no such gap to be filled. There would be no need for a rescue, for a path back to God. Christianity, as we know it, could not exist without understanding the need for salvation and Christ's sacrifice. The most interesting thing to reflect on is that original sin not only established the need for redemption, but it has also shaped the way humanity views salvation. Christianity is not only a quest to live according to the teachings of Christ, but it is also a journey of reconciliation, back to the perfect relationship with God that was lost in the Garden of Eden. Salvation, then, is not just a moral concept, but a profound need that reflects the condition of humanity in its separation from God. If Adam and Eve had not sinned, this need for reconciliation would never have been created. Jesus, in turn, would not have needed to die on the cross, because the reason he came into the world, the redemption of humanity, and would never have arisen. The relationship between sin and redemption goes beyond the simple understanding that sin separates man from God. It also reflects the reality of suffering and death as a consequence of the initial separation. Without original sin, there would be no physical death as we know it, and humanity would never have experienced pain, loss, or suffering. Christ's death on the cross, then, would not only be payment for sins, but an experience that teaches us about suffering and the ability to give something of ourselves for the salvation of others. The most profound thing, perhaps, is understanding that the Jesus sacrifice was the only way to restore a broken relationship. Without the fall, humanity would have continued in harmony with God, without the need for a sacrifice to reconcile the two. This raises the question of need of the cross in perspective. Jesus came into the world, and his death on the cross was the direct result of the separation caused by sin. If humanity had remained in purity, Christ's sacrifice would not have made sense in the same way. In a world without original sin, salvation would have been seen in a completely different light, perhaps more as an idea of spiritual growth than as a need to rescue humanity from its separation from God. Now I want to hear from you. How do you believe Christ's mission would have been viewed in a world without original sin? What would this change in the way we view Jesus and salvation? Leave your opinion in the comments about the impact of the fall of Adam and Eve on the mission of Christ and how it shaped Christianity. Your reflection can help us understand more deeply the importance of redemption and the figure of Jesus in our journey of faith. Free will is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating characteristics of humanity. It makes us capable of making choices, of defining the course of our lives, and of deciding between good and evil. But if we look at the world without original sin, an essential question arises. Would free will be as meaningful without sin? In a world where the temptation of evil had never entered, how would our moral choices be impacted? Without the presence of original sin, would freedom of choice still be valuable? Or would it lose the moral weight it has in our current reality? To understand this, we first need to reflect on what it means to be human. Free will is what differentiates us from other living beings. We, as human beings, have the ability to make conscious choices, to decide between different paths, to reflect on our actions and their consequences. But would this freedom, which we cherish so much, lose its meaning if the temptations and challenges that sin brought to the world did not exist? If original sin had never occurred, if humanity had remained pure, would it be possible that free will would still be such a powerful force? Let's imagine for a moment what the world would be like in a state of purity, like the Garden of Eden before the fall. Adam and Eve were in complete freedom, having the ability to choose between living in perfect harmony with God or giving in to the temptation that would arise. This moment was essential for the introduction of the concept of free will. They had the opportunity to choose good, to follow God's will, but also the option to choose evil by disobeying the divine command. If they had never disobeyed, would free will have lost the moral depth it gained through sin? If Adam and Eve had not experienced temptation, would your moral choice be equally significant? Or without opposition, would human choices simply become automatic, without the weight that our ability to choose between right and wrong gives? This is where the complexity of free will comes in. It not only exists as a freedom of choice, but also as a means of moral and spiritual growth. When we make difficult choices, when we are faced with moral dilemmas, those decisions teach us about who we are, about what we value, about our capacity to do good or evil. Original sin, by separating us from God, brought the need to get closer to Him, and this process, in part, happened because we were forced to make choices that shaped our humanity. The struggle between good and evil that arose with sin has brought us an opportunity for spiritual and moral growth that we would never have experienced in a perfect, sinless world. Now, imagine that humanity had never been separated from God, that Adam and Eve had never sinned, and therefore there had not been the moral struggle that sin brought. What would this mean for free will? Would choices made in a sinless world have the same moral weight? If evil had never existed, would moral choices still matter? The absence of temptation would have made the choices easier but also less meaningful. Free will would have become an exercise without real value, without the need to decide between good and evil, because there would be no evil to combat. This reflection leads us to think about what it really means to be free. True freedom is making conscious choices, knowing the consequences of our actions, and still choosing the good. Free will is an opportunity for us to grow and learn from our failures, and without original sin, humanity would not have faced the same types of spiritual and moral challenges. This raises an important question. Without sin, would we, in fact, be free to make real choices? Or would we just be following a determined path without the possibility of making mistakes, without the opportunity to evolve spiritually? It is fascinating to realize that the presence of sin in the world not only offers us the possibility of choosing between good and evil, but also offers us the opportunity to experience true freedom. By resisting temptation, by making moral choices in a world full of challenges, we learn the true value of freedom. Sin forces us to face our humanity, to recognize our weaknesses, and to seek strength, to do good, to correct our mistakes, and to fight for a better world. If there were no sin, there would not be the same need to fight against evil, and our freedom of choice would become something without great meaning. This leads us to an even deeper question. Would free will, as we know it, be as valuable if there were no opposition? What is really necessary for a choice to be meaningful? Wouldn't confronting temptation with evil be the key to making freedom of choice become something truly profound. Without the option to make mistakes, to make choices that challenge us, would free will still have the same moral and spiritual depth? Now, thinking about all this, how do you see the importance of free will in a sinless world? Would our choices be as meaningful and spiritually enriching without evil? Leave your comment below and share your views on the impact of sin on free will and the way we make our moral choices. Your input can help us more deeply understand the value of freedom, of choice, and how it shapes our spiritual journey. Original sin, introduced by the disobedience of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, was not only the event that brought about the fall of humanity, but also the origin of a series of profound lessons that to this day resonate in our understanding of life, morality, and the relationship with God. The act of disobeying the divine command by eating the forbidden fruit altered the course of human history, creating a definitive separation between humanity and God, and introducing sin into the world. This separation was not just spiritual, it affected the entire human experience, shaping subsequent generations, and to this day reverberates in the decisions and challenges we face daily. But more than bringing pain and separation, sin also taught us crucial lessons about who we are, our human condition, and our need for redemption. The first and most evident teaching of sin is about our human frailty and our capacity to fail. Before the fall, Adam and Eve lived in a state of perfect harmony with God, without any separation between them and the Creator. They enjoyed pure freedom, living in full communion with God, nature, and each other. However, by choosing to disobey God, they taught us, from that moment on, that we are vulnerable to error. Original sin is not just an individual failure of Adam and Eve, but a reflection on human nature, on our propensity to fail, to give in to temptation, and to disobey God's will. We all carry this weakness within us, and sin makes us face this reality directly. Sin reveals to us our condition of being imperfect, of failing, of being susceptible to evil, and teaches us that we need something greater than ourselves to achieve true peace and salvation. But this human frailty is not just a grim observation, it also teaches us the importance of repentance and transformation. After sin, Adam and Eve found themselves separated from God, and humanity began to experience pain and suffering as a consequence of this separation. It was at that moment that humanity learned that sin is not just a momentary failure, but something that has profound effects on our relationship with God and the world. Sin is not something we can simply ignore or avoid. It has a lasting and often irreversible impact. But this is exactly where the most important lesson that sin brings us comes in: the need for redemption, repentance, the quest for transformation, and the desire to restore what has been broken are the foundation of our spiritual journey. Sin, by moving us away from God, also pushes us to search for something greater, for reconciliation, for a return to lost harmony. Furthermore, sin teaches us about the true meaning of perfection. In Eden, before the fall, Adam and Eve lived in a state of perfection. Everything was in harmony. There was no suffering, there was no evil, and everything was according to God's will. But when introducing sin into the world, humanity found itself faced with the reality that perfection is not something that can be achieved without effort, without pain, without challenges. Sin showed us that true perfection is not just the absence of flaws, but a journey of growth and overcoming. Perfection is not something given, but something to be achieved through the fight against evil, the constant search for God's will, and overcoming our flaws and limitations. Original sin, by causing us to make mistakes, also gives us the opportunity to learn, grow, and seek perfection, but now in a more conscious way, and deeply rooted in our experience with evil and separation from God. Sin also has a profound impact on our morality. Before the fall, Adam and Eve lived in harmony with God, following His commandments without question. There was no need to discern good from evil, as they lived in perfect obedience to the divine will. But sin introduced a moral choice that became essential to humanity. The struggle between good and evil, between following God's will and giving in to temptation, has become a central part of the human experience. Since the fall, we have been challenged to make choices, to distinguish right from wrong, to fight temptations, and to choose to live according to the values that God teaches us. Sin has taught us that morality is not a given, but something that needs to be cultivated, practiced, and defended, often against the forces of evil that surround us. Original sin, by presenting us with evil, also gave us the understanding of what is good, just and virtuous. However, sin also teaches us the importance of forgiveness and love for others. When Adam and Eve sinned, the separation from God was immediate and profound, but we also began the experience of understanding the value of forgiveness. Sin brought the pain of separation, but it also brought us the opportunity to seek restoration and forgiveness. Forgiveness is a fundamental lesson that sin has taught us, because without sin, we would not have fully understood the value of divine mercy and the importance of forgiving each other. The experience of sin leads us to seek reconciliation, to understand the need to forgive and to be forgiven, and to love our neighbors, even when we are hurt by their actions. Without the experience of sin, we may never have learned to forgive, love, and practice mercy in the same way we do today. Sin teaches us, therefore, many profound lessons about human nature, about what it means to be truly good, and about the need for redemption. He is not only the cause of suffering, but also the starting point for our spiritual journey, for our understanding that we need God to restore us, for our understanding that perfection can only be achieved through divine grace and mercy. And without sin, humanity would not have evolved spiritually in the same way. We would not have learned about forgiveness, compassion, the fight against evil, the importance of morality and virtue. Sin teaches us to value redemption and leads us to constantly seek perfection, knowing that we will never achieve it alone, but only through the grace of God. Now I want to hear from you. How did original sin impact your views on good and evil and the need for redemption? Leave it in the comments how you understand the role of sin in shaping human character and in our quest for a deeper spiritual life. His vision can help others reflect on the importance of these lessons, which, although painful, are essential for our spiritual and moral evolution. The answer to what would have happened if Adam and Eve had not eaten the forbidden fruit is undoubtedly complex and profound. Throughout this reflection, we were challenged to imagine a world without original sin, without the separation it caused, without the pain, suffering, moral and existential crises that we have carried as humanity since that moment in the Garden of Eden. What would have become of us if, instead of giving in to temptation, Adam and Eve had resisted and obeyed God? What would the development of humanity be like without the need for redemption, without the constant moral struggle against evil? One thing is certain: without original sin, our history would have been radically different. Imagine a world without suffering, without death, without pain, where everyone lives in harmony, without the need to fight temptations. Perfection seems attractive, something we all desire. But would perfection have been enough for our moral and spiritual evolution? Would the absence of suffering and the need to choose between good and evil have allowed us to grow spiritually in the same way? Or somehow, did our freedom, our moral and spiritual growth, come about precisely because we had to make these difficult choices, because we had to face the consequences of sin and separation from God? It's fascinating to think about how sin has shaped the human journey. Sin brought challenges, of course, but it also gave us the opportunity to grow and evolve. Without it, humanity could have become stagnant, without a true understanding of the need for moral and spiritual improvement. Free will and the ability to choose, to learn from our mistakes, are part of our experience as human beings. Without original sin, perhaps we would not have experienced the process of transformation that is so central to our spiritual journey. Our need for redemption and to live in accordance with divine morality is, in some way, what drives us to seek perfection. However, without sin, there would not be this search, this constant struggle to improve. We would not have developed the same ability to perceive good, evil, truth, lies, and true love if sin had never taught us what it means to be separated from God. What we know today about forgiveness, mercy, grace, and repentance arose precisely because sin showed us our failures and led us to seek restoration. If we had not experienced the evil, would we have valued the good in the same way? Suffering teaches us the importance of love, compassion, and forgiveness, and all of this is a direct reflection of how humanity reacted to sin and separation from God. Perfection, which would be the ideal state, also challenges us to question the purpose of life. If Adam and Eve had never sinned, would our spiritual evolution have been simpler, but also less significant? Without difficulties and the need for redemption, would life have a purpose as deep and enriching as the one we experience? Now, Sin leads us to a richer understanding of ourselves and our dependence on God. The fight against evil gives us the chance to get closer to God, to grow in our virtues, and to be transformed. And, as difficult as it may be to accept, sin, in its essence, has given us the opportunity to understand God's love and mercy in a unique way. If we had never sinned, we would not have known the depth of forgiveness, the true experience of reconciliation with the Creator. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, which is the divine response to sin, teaches us about unconditional love, about how God loves us despite our faults. If Adam and Eve had remained in purity, we may never have known this kind of radical love, this kind of redemption. As we reflect on everything we have discussed so far, we see that original sin and its consequences are not just distant events from the distant past, but timeless lessons that shape the way we live and relate to God and others to this day. Each of these reflections leads us to a deeper understanding of our human condition, the need for redemption, and the search for perfection in an imperfect world. This journey of reflection and learning not only clarifies our relationship with God, but also challenges us to be better, to make better choices, and to get closer to our true essence. You are part of this journey. Every thought you share, every interaction you have with this content helps shape this channel's larger mission, transforming lives and expanding. The knowledge that frees us, brings us closer and guides us. You're not just watching a video. You are an essential part of this community, which seeks not only to understand, but to live these deeper concepts about humanity and the relationship with God. To sign up now, you become an active part of this transformative movement. Your participation is not only valuable, but essential to continue spreading this powerful message to more people. Join us now and be the protagonist of this incredible mission. And by sharing your perspective, you contribute significantly to the evolution of this space. We want to know what touched you today, what this reflection on original sin and its relationship with humanity brought to your life. Your voice is essential to build something even greater, something that helps all of us reflect more deeply on who we are and what our true purpose is here. The impact of your comment can make a huge difference in the lives of others who are searching for answers or a deeper way to understand their own journey. Write in the comments and inspire others with your vision. Every interaction counts, and liking this video is more than just a simple gesture. Every like helps to take this message further, expanding the scope of everything we discussed here. The more people we reach, the more we can share this knowledge that transforms, heals, and uplifts. Like now, and become part of this transformation that is happening right before your eyes. There is something unexpected waiting for you. Watch the next video now and dive even deeper into this fascinating topic. Amazing revelations are coming, and you won't want to miss the next reflection that will further challenge the way you see the world and your relationship with God.